I was mid-sentence, the kind of sentence that makes other people write things down, when the lobby camera caught a small figure holding a white envelope like it was a passport. Security's voice in my ear. "Sir, there's a child asking to see you." In the reflection of the elevator doors, I was a man who knew how to win. Tuesday afternoons, tie straight, smile preloaded, calendar, a grid of clean boxes. In the reflection was also a man who had left compassion at the margins because margins were messy. "Let her up," I said, before I could talk myself into being reasonable. She rode the elevator like it was an event. When the doors opened on 27, she stepped out with a bravery that didn't need applause. Ponytail, a little crooked, shoes too new or too clean for a city floor. My assistant, Rachel, calm during tempests, lethal against euphemism, was already kneeling to meet the child's eyes. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Rachel." "Who are you here to see?" "Mr. Anderson," the girl said. "I have to put this in his hand." "That would be me, Michael Anderson. If you've seen my name in a headline, it was probably next to verbs like scaled, optimized, or disrupted. My niche is time taking friction out of places that pretend they're not about people. Networks, approvals, logistics. We built a company on the gospel of clean through lines. People liked the speed. The market loved the story. "Hi," I said, and I made my voice smaller, not because I was talking to a child, but because the moment asked for a human. "I'm Michael." She offered the envelope with 2 hands. "From my mom." She said, "You'll know why." The paper was creased the way worry creases things. My name was written in slow blue ink, like someone did their careful best while a clock argued with their body. There are letters that confirm meetings, letters that threaten lawsuits, letters that ask for money. This wasn't any of those. It was a door. "Michael, you don't know me. I'm Anna Carter. I don't have time for poetry, and I won't make this a campaign. 3 years ago, a decision your company made saved some people time and cost others the time they didn't have. We adjusted. We always adjust. My daughter shouldn't have to. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for sight. If Emily got this to you, please see her. Please see the rooms your choices reach. Anna." I read it once, then again. Not for comprehension, every word stood up on the first pass, but because the words didn't fit any folder on my desk. Sight isn't a KPI. Seeing isn't a metric. Yet, a sentence can rearrange a morning harder than any earnings miss. "Is your mom with you?" I asked. "She's resting," the girl Emily said. "Children learn the soft words first. She said to give you our number if you wanted to call, but after 2, because the nice nurse starts then." Rachel handed her a hot chocolate that appeared from nowhere. "Do you want to sit by the window while Mr. Anderson reads?" she asked. Emily nodded like she had rehearsed bravery for an audience of 2. I turned the letter over. The back was blank. The front was enough. There are defensive reflexes you learn when power gets used to being praised. We did what we had to. Every decision costs. Someone else would do worse. They lined up politely, waiting for me to pick one. I didn't. I watched Emily color a small house with a door she carefully drew open. "Tell me about your mom," I asked. She told me the way children tell the truth. Out of order, all at once, details tumbling into each other. Lemon tea. A windowsill garden with lazy Sunday double shifts at the clinic. Words that started showing up in their kitchen like uninvited relatives. Approvals, networks, waiting periods. The slow math of what happens when someone who is already tired is asked to do the exhausting parts of a system. "Why me?" I said, and regretted it immediately. I mean, how did she think I could help? Emily looked at me like I'd missed the point. "Because you made it," she said. "If you made the way, you can unmake the parts that hurt. Some sentences collapse the distance between 2 lives. That one did." I glanced at the wall clock, 8:17 a.m. At 8:15, I was supposed to be in a room persuading grown adults to buy an acquisition that would increase our reach by 14% and our headaches by 40%. I told Rachel to reschedule. Tell them a letter came up. I said, the board prefers nouns you can put on a spreadsheet. Letter doesn't chart well. I walked Emily down to see the living wall in the atrium, the one with ferns and a tiny bee hotel people miss because the logo is shinier. We stood in front of living things for a minute because sometimes remembering is manual. Emily told me her mom says leaves are just hands that forgot how to be fingers. Do you know what that means? She asked. Not yet, I said, but I'd like to. Back upstairs, the office sounded exactly the same, and nothing felt the same. I sent Emily home with a driver who has kids' emergency number after 2. Then I told Rachel, call legal, pull the contracts from the approval migration, show me what we changed and what changed us. By 10:10, legal filled my conference table with immaculate sentences that had made sense at the time. I saw an old version of myself in every clause. Reduce variability, harmonize vendors, tighten windows to curtail fraud, standardize inputs, safeguard integrity at scale. Every line a sermon on the religion of averages. Where did it get worse? I asked. Rachel slid a chart forward. A slender red band, easy to miss if you wanted to be the kind of person who misses things. Certain zip codes, non-standard presentations, cases that needed a reader who knew the smell of a clinic waiting room at 4:55 p.m. when the nurse is 2 people short and the coffee is asking for a union. We flagged it, she said. We recommended an exception path. You said, let's revisit in Q3. Which quarter, which year? The calendar is generous to people who can write it. At 11:05, Mitchell, my CFO, and the friend who once taped a napkin with our founding vow inside an office supply closet, no wins that cost us our faces, shut my door and asked, what happened? A letter, I said. He waited for the rest. A girl, I added. Emily. He nodded like he'd been expecting this summons for years. Okay. What are we doing? Unmaking the parts that hurt, I said. Starting with reinstating an exception path. Immediate. We can eat the cost while we engineer care into the system. Mitchell's mouth did the thing it does when he's happy we're choosing something hard. Margins dip, he said. We model that. Investors ask questions, I said. We answer them. Endology 1 and R. The press? We don't feed a story. We fix a door. At 1:58 p.m., I dialed the number on the sticky note. Hello? The voice on the line was careful, strong in the way people are when strength is expensive. Anna? This is Michael Anderson. The pause held a whole file of memories I couldn't see. I hoped you'd call, she said. Emily? She's okay, I said, braver than the building. I told her we were looking. She told me she hadn't written to make a scene. I don't want to leave without trying to make something easier for whoever walks in after me, she said. I said the words I was worried would sound like a press release and tried to make them sound like a promise. We will put people back in the center. We will build a way that doesn't depend on a child delivering a letter to a lobby. What are you going to do? She asked. So I told her, widen the window. Let doctor notes trigger human review. Build a small team with authority to overrule the algorithm when confidence outruns understanding. Pay for the harm we created while we fix the code that taught us how to ignore it. Audit publicly. Apologize like the present tense. Is it enough? I asked. It's a start, she said. Starts are honest. Can I visit? I asked, because some conversations deserve air and eyes. You can, she said. Come like a person, not a press release, and wait for the rest scene. Haben non. At 7:12 that evening, I stood at the foot of a bed under fluorescent lights that tried their best. Emily yanked a chair toward me with the authority of someone who has figured out grown-ups are mostly improvising. Anna's smile was smaller than her courage and larger than the room. We didn't talk about the brand. We talked about her garden, about the book she kept rereading without finishing, about the nurse who switches on at 2 and how kindness can be a skill. Then she asked, "So, what are you going to do?" And I told her again, because some vows deserve witnesses. On the drive home, I didn't check my email. I looked at bus stops, bikes, people carrying their evenings. At a red light, I unfolded the letter and read the same 3 sentences that had rearranged my day. Please see her. Please see the rooms your choices reach. Tomorrow would ask for charts, votes, vendors, verbs. Tonight, the ask was simpler. Remember your face. Back in the lobby, a family wrestled a stroller and a heavy door. I held it and felt the weight of a hinge I hadn't noticed, because doors open easily for people like me. The wind caught, and the door eased. A small thing. A true thing. A beginning that didn't announce itself as one, but was. When you build your life on clean decks and tighter cycles, you start to believe the past is just a backlog you can groom. But the past isn't a task. It's a room with the light left on. The day after Emily brought the letter, the door to that room swung wide, and I had to walk back in. I didn't grow up around men in suits. I grew up around people who saved receipts in a coffee tin and believed in the miracle of a paycheck landing on time. My mother could turn rice and beans into an occasion. My father could coax a broken appliance into a second life with a screwdriver and a prayer. We had plans, but not margin. Margin is where joy hides time to linger, money to try, days to rest. Systems didn't notice us unless we failed loudly or succeeded conspicuously. I chose the latter. Scholarships, night shifts, an internship where I learned the secret handshake for rooms you can't see from the street. I found my niche at 24. Time. Not selling it, saving it. Shaving minutes without losing meaning. Building rails so that friction had fewer places to hide. If you had asked me then what I believed, I would have said, everyone deserves a faster yes. I said it enough that it started to sound like a prayer. My first real win was a pilot with a hospital network that bragged about its skyline and hid its waiting rooms. I wore the same suit for 3 days because it felt like armor. Our pitch was clean. Centralize approvals, standardize inputs, automate triage, harmonize vendors. The math sang. The model smiled. 6 months later, the average wait time had fallen by 19%. The mayor shook my hand like the cameras were still rolling. The board asked for a bigger demonstration. The market liked our story. I liked what the stock chart said about my future. If I noticed the outliers, then I told myself they were version 2 problems. A nurse named Olivia emailed to say, "Your system downgraded Mrs. Patel's case because the form doesn't understand the doctor's note." I forwarded it with a "let's fix" and felt responsible. A clinic manager phoned to say, "We can't get the override. The time window closed during a shift change." I wrote, "We'll expand the window," then sat in a meeting where someone said, "But utilization targets." And I said, "Let's revisit in Q3," and then I slept fine. It's easy to call harm noise when your microphone only listens to averages. Mitchell and I taped our founding vow inside a supply closet so we'd have to see it when we were out of staples. No wins that cost us our faces. We meant it. But you can lose your face slowly, in high-resolution increments, one sophisticated sentence at a time. Reduce variability. Safeguard integrity at scale. Protect the signal from outlier distortion. We spoke fluently in the dialect that makes a human sound like a rounding error. I met Rachel on stage. Of all places. A health tech summit, 900 people, a panel with too many syllables in the title. I was delivering the benediction for algorithmic triage, how the model would reallocate staff hours to high-impact zones. She raised her hand. What do you call it when impact is defined by a metric that can't see the person who doesn't fit it? I answered with math. She answered with a story. A month later, I hired her, because I needed someone who wasn't impressed by my favorite verbs. By the second year, we stopped being a clever company and started being an infrastructure. There's a line you cross where your product becomes someone else's weather. Schedulers built their days around our windows. Nurses built their patients around our confidence scores. Vendors built their payrolls around our timing. When you become weather, you can irrigate or you can flood. Sometimes we did both on the same afternoon. The decision that led to Anna's letter wasn't born from greed. It was born from worship. We worshipped efficiency like it could absolve us of the parts of care that can't be hurried. The migration memo sat in our system history like a trophy and a warning. 3 years ago, we shifted approvals to a clean path. Tighter windows, standardized notes, stricter vendor clocks, higher thresholds for human intervention. Fraud dips, cost stabilizes, averages glow, on paper a win. In rooms with people, a more complicated sentence. On the second day after the letter, I asked legal to read me our own incantations out loud. It's different when you hear them spoken. To minimize variance across vendor behaviors. To ensure uniformity of inputs. To prevent degradation of signal from non-standard cases. I could hear my older self in every clause. I could also hear whose voices went missing when we wrote them. Where did it get worse? I asked. Rachel had already done the work. She slid me a chart with a slender red line that looked polite until you remembered each pixel was a person. The outliers weren't random. They clustered. Zip codes where the bus doesn't believe in schedules, clinics that run chronic, short-staffed, caregivers juggling 2 jobs, patients whose conditions don't read like the textbook, doctors who still write plain English in a margin because it's faster to explain yourself to a human than to a drop-down. We proposed an exception path, Rachel said. A small team trained to read what the model can't, with authority to override. She didn't add the next line. She didn't have to. I had tabled it. We wrote, revisit Q3. Q3 is a clever synonym for never if no one is watching. It's embarrassing to realize you didn't lack information. You lacked courage. When I got home that night after visiting Anna the first time, I pulled an old cardboard box from my closet, press clippings, conference badges, a newspaper where a profile called me the quiet architect of time. My mother had kept the paper and circled quiet like it was the compliment she wanted me to keep. I read the piece again, same adjectives, different man. Not because the writer was wrong, but because the person he wrote about didn't know yet which rooms his choices reached. There's a memory I had forgotten until the letter. I was 12, and my classmate's mother worked the night shift as a cleaner at the hospital. She came to a school meeting and fell asleep in a folding chair while the principal lectured about tardiness. People smiled. Not cruelly, just a little. That reflex we have for other people's ordinary humiliations when we're relieved it's not ours. I remember wanting to stand up and say, the chair is the problem. The time is the problem. The rule is the problem. I didn't. I was 12. I waited until I grew up to build a chair that made other people tired. On Wednesday morning, before the board meeting, I asked our team to pull a 10-year trend line, not for revenue or churn, but for something we'd never plotted. Door weight. We didn't have a name yet. I just described it how heavy the door feels for a person to move through our system. Number of steps, number of re-explanations, number of call back after lunch, number of times the machine says no while a human knows the answer is yes. We hacked together a proxy, a composite score from tickets, call logs, escalation notes. It wasn't elegant. It was honest. The line had gone down for most. It had gone up for some, and those some had the least grip strength to begin with. Mitchell stared at the plot and breathed out through his nose, the way he does when he's angry at a number that pretends to be neutral. We optimized the river and forgot the people who can't swim, he said. Let's build a bridge. He pulled a budget we could repurpose without breaking anything that mattered. We'll take the hit, he said. We'll say why. He was already preparing for the calls we'd have to make. The vendors who prefer predictability to fairness, the investors who pretend ethics is an optional plug-in, the analysts who like their stories shaped like staircases. "It will be noisy," he said. "We can be louder with the boring parts." He always means the paperwork. Change is glamorous in the opening montage and bureaucratic in the third act. If you stop in the third act, you don't get an ending, you get a loop. I called Olivia, the nurse whose email I had forwarded 2 years earlier with a tiny lie attached to it. "We'll fix." I told her I was late to the truth. "Mrs. Patel died last year," she said. She didn't accuse me. She accused the hours I mispriced. "We're building a team to own what the algorithm can't. We'll widen the window. We'll give schedulers conditional authority. We'll publish where we fail." She let the silence sit, then said, "Okay, send me the names. I'll test your bridge." In Miterdome Hein. By lunchtime, a new question had moved in under my ribs. What would it look like to lead without pretending leadership exempts you from repentance? We're used to apologies that arrive with defensive choreography. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," like a present tense verb. Rachel said, "Then say it in a room that can answer back." I thought about the rooms I owed. Schedulers with 2 phones at their ear and a child's shoe in their bag. Case managers who spend their empathy like overtime. Janitors who know which doors are heavy by feel. Doctors who still write margin notes because anything written to a human is faster than clicking through a form designed to impress a machine. Patients who've been trained to translate suffering into checkboxes and then apologize for taking too long. In the afternoon, I went to see my mother. She keeps small plants on the windowsill and refuses to name them, because she believes names are a contract. "You look like a man who finally read the footnotes," she said, pouring tea. I told her about Emily, about the letter, about Anna's eyes, about the hallway between intent and impact that I had decorated with phrases to make the walk feel shorter. When I finished, she asked the same question she asks every time I bring her a story I want her to bless. "Are you doing this to be good or to feel good?" If we keep being honest, good has a chance. She smiled. "Remember your face," she said. "You promised it to a small boy once." She meant me, age 12, wanting to stand up in a room full of folding chairs. "Keep it," she said. That evening, I opened a folder we used to call Edge Cases and renamed it Sightlines. Words become rooms if you let them. Edge cases live at the edge. Sightlines look across. I wrote the first draft of a charter. We will not call people exceptions because our system is too narrow. We will not punish a human for needing a human. We will not accept an average that hides a wound. We will put names on responsibility and faces on charts. We will publish the distribution, not just the mean. We will make doors lighter. Before I slept, I unfolded Anna's letter again. The crease was softer. The ink was not. Please see her. Please see the rooms your choices reach. Seeing isn't a metric, but it is the only way to choose the next right verb. Tomorrow, we would argue numbers and policy and sequence. Tonight, I wrote a sentence on the whiteboard in my kitchen, where no one but me could see it. We built a faster yes. Now, we build a kinder no and a truer yes. On the way to bed, I checked my phone. Rachel had sent a list titled Heavy Doors, crowdsourced from staff who knew exactly where the hinges squealed. Override window too tight for shift change. Notes field that strips meaning out of free text. A callback loop that punishes people who can least afford to call back. Escalation email that disappears into a shared inbox. A vendor SLA that rewards speed over sense. I wrote, "We start here." She replied, "We start here." Morning would bring the board, then vendors, then the first test of our courage in a room where nobody claps. But before that, I stood in my own lobby again, early, just to watch doors open and close. A delivery driver backed through with a cart stacked high. A woman with a cane hesitated, calculating weight. A man in a suit used a hip and a shoulder instead of a hand. I held the door 3 times and tried not to feel noble for doing something a hinge could be engineered to do. We had engineered so much, we would engineer this too. But first we would admit what engineering can't do alone. See? And second, we would answer the question I'd put on the first slide of every meeting since the letter, "What is this for?" I touched the paper in my pocket like it was a compass, not a curse, and headed upstairs to begin the work of choosing sight over pride, people over averages, verbs over poses. The day would test our model. The day would test our face. And if we passed, it wouldn't be because we were clever. It would be because a child brought a letter, and we finally decided to read it as if it were addressed to us. The morning began with an inbox full of opinions wearing the clothes of facts. A grainy photo me, half kneeling to hear a child in the lobby had done what photos do in a hungry ecosystem. It traveled faster than context. Headlines practice their arithmetic. Shame plus CEO equals pivot. Redemption equals views. The temptation was to draft a statement clever enough to herd all that noise back into a neat paragraph. I closed the compose window and opened a whiteboard instead. On top I wrote, in block letters, "What is this for?" At 8:30, the sightline room filled. We'd chosen it on purpose, a smaller, humbler space, windows that let in the sound of traffic, a table with scratches that kept us honest. Rachel brought pins and butcher paper. Mitchell brought a stack of budget printouts with the parts that hurt underlined. Priya, our consulting social worker, arrived with a legal pad where she'd written a single sentence at the top. If the process can't see the person, the process is wrong. We worked the first 3 cases out loud. Case 1. A caregiver who'd reached the end of her override window because a shift change ate the last 20 minutes of the day. Case 2. A physician note with crucial nuance buried in a free text field the algorithm didn't parse. Case 3. A network approval stalled because the vendor SLA rewarded speed over sense in Step 2, which meant Step 3 inherited a contradiction. "Where does the algorithm's confidence outrun its understanding?" Priya asked. One of our engineers pointed to the features the model had learned to trust: consistent code, numeric ranges, checkbox clarity. The model was never trained to believe a paragraph, he admitted. We trained it to believe a shape. Rachel drew a box on the paper and labeled it with a single word: paragraph. "Then a human reads this," she said. "Full stop. And out as some did, and the action citer Namananas Tyne." By 9:20, we had our first 4 changes. 1. Override window expansion. Widen to account for shift changes. Add a grace buffer at open and close. 2. Free text. Trigger any physician note containing flags from a vetted keyword list and any note exceeding X characters with clinical terms, auto-routes to a human within the sightline. 3. Scheduler authority, limited conditional overrides tied to call time context, with a required comment and an audit trail that looks for patterns but doesn't punish mercy. 4. Vendor SLA update. Poor short-term cost sharing while we reweight incentives so that fast doesn't outrank right. Write it down so a person can understand it, Priya said. That includes your future selves. Mitchell ran the numbers without flinching. We can underwrite the grace buffers and the sightline headcount out of the strategic initiatives bucket, he said. Short-term margin dip, expected. Long-term retention and network health, likely. I'll build the curves. Legal joined at 10. They were ready to say no in good faith. We asked them to say how. We mapped indemnity zones, documented override authority, and wrote a clause that felt like a prayer disguised as a procedure. In cases where a trained human believes the model's confidence is unsupported by the full clinical context, the human will own the decision and the follow-through, and the disgroove and the della-dellers. Own is a strong word, our general counsel said. It is, I said. That's why we're using it. By 11, I was downstairs with a cup of coffee I didn't deserve, reading the lobby the way I used to read heat maps. A security guard held the door for a delivery driver steering a cart that wanted to be a sail. A young man used his hip to keep the weight off his wrist. A woman in a denim jacket hesitated like she was calculating force. That was our product. 2 hinges, handles, weight. If you don't see it, you don't fix it. The board session at noon was a stress test for everything we said we believed. We opened with the slide. Rachel insisted on white background. Black letters, what is this for? Then we told the truth the way truth wants to be told, without violins, without villains, names removed where they should be, responsibility not. I went first. We cut wait times for most, I said. We increased them for some of the people with the least time to give. We optimized averages and missed outliers. We were late to site. Mitchell took the numbers baton next, his voice steady as a metronome. Expected margin impact this quarter. Projected retention lift over 8. Churn scenarios. Network level goodwill you can't put in a cell, but that touches every line. Rachel walked the mechanics, the sightline charter, escalation triggers, audit cadence, and a human-in-the-loop design that doesn't turn into a dumping ground. Questions found us like they always do. Are we over-indexing on edge cases? We're bringing them into the average on purpose, I said. Are you creating a precedent you can't sustain? We're acknowledging a precedent we already created, Rachel said. We built a system that assumed sameness. We're repairing it. Competitive risk? Competitors who don't do this will win some quarters and lose the decade, Mitchell said. We'd like the decade. PR plan? No choreography until we have results, I said. We'll talk after we've listened. The chair closed her laptop slowly. People will call this soft, she said. People will call this cynical. People will call it expensive. She smiled without moving her mouth. They'll be wrong on at least 2 out of 3. She nodded once. You have my vote. Tell the street the truth and give them a reason to stay for the rest of the song. We left lighter because we wouldn't be fighting the wrong battle. Heavier because we had chosen the right one. At 2:30, 2 vendor teams dialed into a call where compromise was the only win. Their lawyer led. We staffed to your predictability, she said. Variability creates cost. Mitchell didn't blink. We'll share it while we stabilize the path. The ops lead folded her arms. What stops this from becoming a permanent exception that eats our margins? Rachel answered with a sentence that landed like a level. If an exception never stops happening, it isn't an exception. It's a reality your system refuses to admit. We got to proceed with caveats, which is how grown-ups say yes when they're protecting their flanks. At 3:45, communications tried one more time. We can shape the narrative, they said. Or we can shape the policy, I replied. Put a notice on the site. Here's the Sightline hotline and the first 4 changes. Tell partners how to reach a human. Publish the audit dates. No heroics, no hashtags. The town hall invite went out at 4:10. Nurses, schedulers, case managers, custodial staff, clinic leads, vendor reps. We booked the big auditorium with the bad carpet and good acoustics. The subject line avoided poetry. We are changing the door. Before I went home, I took the elevator to 27 and stared at the spot where the letter had first been in my hand. I wrote a short email to the company, 2 paragraphs, plain. We built a faster yes. We also built heavier doors for some. We're unmaking the parts that hurt and remaking the parts that should have been human all along. Here's what changes today. Here's how to ask for help. Here's where we'll show our work. No emojis. No exclamation points. We were not announcing a campaign. We were committing to a practice. I visited Anna at dusk with flowers that looked like they intended to stay alive. Emily met me in the hall and gave a crisp report. We had soup. Mom took a nap. The nice nurse is here. In the room, Anna was brighter than the bulbs would allow. We talked about the first 4 changes and the next dozen that would have to follow. She didn't ask for milestones. She asked for verbs. "Keep listening," she said. "Keep writing down the boring parts. The world changes there." Emily drew another door, this one with a small window at child height. "So you don't have to guess," she said. "So you can see who's coming." I nodded and thought, that's the product spec. The next morning began with a quiet test. The Sightline inbox had 27 messages before 9 a.m. Some were noise. Most were signal. Override window closed during shift change. Doc note says patient can't return tomorrow. Free text ignored. Grandparent caregiver. Phone calls after 6 only. System keeps calling at noon. We triaged like paramedics, not tourists. It felt right. A scheduler named Mai called the hotline and got a person in under a minute. Priya had insisted on a human being the first voice the first week. "I have a mother on the line," Mai said softly. Her son's paperwork bounced because a birthday was transposed. "She's been on hold twice. Can I fix it?" The old system would have said no with confidence. The new one said yes with a name. We fixed it. Mai didn't cry at work that day. She told us later it was the first time in months. By noon, the engineers had shipped a small change with large consequences. The notes field retained full free text and highlighted clinical terms for human review. It wasn't elegant yet. It was honest. They also added a tiny indicator next to every case that had been touched by a person, a small dot that meant someone owned this. In the review dashboard, the dots looked like stars in a night we had previously called clear. Mitchell brought in early numbers at 2 too soon for narrative, enough for direction. Call time dropped in clusters where the override window had been widened. Vendor step 3 stalls dipped where we reweighted the SLA. The curves didn't sing yet. They hummed. It was the hum of an engine that had been tuned to hear a voice frequency it used to filter out. At 3:30, we rehearsed the town hall. Not the optics, the order. We would start with what we missed, not what we did. Then, what we changed. Then, how to reach us. Then, we listen. I practiced saying, "I'm sorry," without placing any bubble wrap around it. Rachel practiced explaining the Sightline without making it sound like a favor. Priya practiced the hardest line. "You will still be failed sometimes. Here is how we'll show it and fix it." On my way out, I stopped by facilities. "The front doors," I said to Jorge, "what would it take to make them automatic both ways?" He scratched his chin, pleased to be asked like an expert and not a cost. "A kit, an electrician, a half day, and a sign that says we meant this." "Order the kit," I said. "Write the sign." That evening I stood in my mother's kitchen and updated her. She listened the way she always has, with her hands busy and her eyes unused to being wrong. "You sound less like a speech and more like a person," she said. "Keep it." I told her about Emily's window in the door. "That's good design," she said. "Small hands deserve sight, too." On the drive home, I thought about the ways grown-ups learn from children when we don't pretend not to. Children are ruthless auditors. They refuse euphemism. Emily had said, "If you made it, you can unmake the parts that hurt." The sentence followed me like a shadow that would not trip me, only keep me honest about the angle of the light. At 9:11 p.m., I drafted a note to the investor list we rarely emailed without a pitch deck. It was 3 paragraphs and a table. We were changing our process to better serve the people our product touches. Near-term margin dip accepted. Long-term retention, network health, regulatory posture improved. Quarterly audits public. No marketing campaign. This is not content. The table showed the 4 first changes and their immediate metrics. I hit send and turned off my phone. The next morning, the building felt like it had noticed. Or maybe I had. Sight is contagious once you stop pretending it's a luxury. An engineer held the door for a woman with a cane and didn't rush to feel noble about it. A receptionist switched to a headset so both hands were free to help a visitor sort papers. A junior PM taped a handwritten sign by the elevators. If the door is heavy, we'll help. It was small. It was true. It was the culture, learning a new reflex. I checked the Sightline queue. A message from Olivia, the nurse. "Got your new number," she wrote. "Sending 3 cases. If you keep listening, we'll keep telling you where the door is heavy." I replied with 2 words I hadn't used enough in my career. "Thank you." By afternoon, the story that did not want to be a story had built itself a spine, not the headlines. The practice. We were still going to have to face the room on Friday and answer for the harm with our mouths, not just our memos. We were still going to have to walk into a vendor negotiation where caveat would try to swallow care. We were still going to have to test whether an algorithm could be taught to be humble. But for the first time in a long time, I recognized my face in the glass of the elevator doors. That night, I stopped in the lobby before going home. The new automatic mechanism hadn't arrived yet. I pushed the door open for a father balancing a sleeping child in one arm and a paper bag in the other. He nodded in that way grateful people do when they're too careful with their peace to waste it on speeches. When the door swung back, I caught it with my foot and held it for an older couple moving 1 step at a time. It felt less like virtue, more like version control. Upstairs, I took Anna's letter out of my inside pocket and pressed the crease flat on my desk like a map. Please, see her. Please see the rooms your choices reach. We were seeing, we were choosing. And if we did it right, the work would be measured less by applause and more by the relief in a scheduler's voice when power made her day easier instead of heavier. I turned off the light and left the door open. We set the town hall for Friday because Fridays tell the truth. People are tired enough to stop performing and awake enough to say what they mean. We invited the whole constellation: nurses, schedulers, case managers, clinic leads, vendor reps, custodial crews, the folks who work the front desks and know which doors are heavy by feel. We did not invite the press. They came anyway, like rain finds a roof. We put a sign on the door that said, "No cameras inside." It didn't keep out opinions, but it kept the room human. The auditorium had bad carpet and good acoustics. It looked like a place where choir practice and budget meetings have fought to a draw for a decade. We arranged the stage without theater, a table for the Sightline team, 2 microphones in the aisles, a screen behind us with 4 lines of text the size of a confession. What we missed, what we changed, how to reach us. We listen. I went first. Not because CEOs should, but because I had to spend the words that belonged to me. No opener, no joke, no carefully engineered rapport. I told the room that we cut wait times for most and increased them for some of the people with the least time to give. I told them a child brought me a letter, and the letter made me see the rooms my choices reach. Then I said the sentence we usually bury in legal review. I'm sorry. I let it stand. It didn't fix anything. It made the next sentence possible. Rachel walked the changes clean verbs, no heroics. Override window widened with a grace buffer at open and close. Free text physician notes can trigger human review without downgrading priority. Schedulers have limited conditional authority, with a comment and a name attached so responsibility doesn't evaporate. Vendors in pilot are sharing short-term cost while we reweight the SLA so fast no longer outranks right. Priya explained the Sightline like infrastructure, not charity. A trained human takes ownership when the model's confidence outruns its understanding. The human carries the case to resolution and the follow-through is audited. Mitchell put up a page titled The Boring Parts, which got the first real laugh. Budgets moved, metrics added. Audits scheduled quarterly, with distributions not just averages published for anyone to read. Then we listened. A scheduler named Mai stood at the mic, knuckles white around the stem in that way people hold on when they refuse to shake. I have 2 kids, she said. One is in kindergarten and one keeps hiding his shoes, so mornings are chaos. Last month, your system made me tell a mother to call back after lunch because I didn't have authority to override a field that was obviously wrong. I went to the bathroom and cried at work for the first time in 5 years. Not because I was sad. Because I was angry. I don't want to cry at work anymore. Me neither, I said into the mic, and wrote a note in the open doc on the screen. Frontline override authority plus training equals permanent, not pilot. Rachel added, We'll ship the change Monday and publish the training by Wednesday. You'll have a name to escalate to in case Courage needs a partner. As was Aram, a vendor operations lead, said what her lawyer would have sanded down to a euphemism. You're messing with predictability. We staffed to the old flow. Mitchell answered without blinking. We'll shoulder some cost while we stabilize incentives, and we'll publish the glide path so nobody gets surprised past the first surprise. She nodded, not happy, but honest. Sometimes policy is a seesaw. Your job is to keep it from becoming a catapult. A nurse in Navy scrubs raised her hand, then just started talking because you can't always wait when you're used to waiting. When the algorithm says no and I know the answer is yes, I need a person to say, I'll own this, and put their name down. I don't care if that person is 2 floors up or 2 zip codes away. I just need a name. Rachel replied, You'll have a name on every handoff. If you don't, we failed. Call us on it. A janitor named Leo Jorge's friend came to the mic with a roll of blue tape in his back pocket. I don't know about models, he said, but I know about doors. A good door does 2 things, lets good in and keeps harm out. Some of your doors are heavy. My wife has arthritis. Heavy doors make you feel small. He sat, and the room hummed with a kind of agreement spreadsheets don't register. I looked at the sightline table. Door weight index, I said. We codify what Leo just told us. One of the engineers lifted his pen like he'd been waiting for that spec all week. We kept going. A case manager described the callback loop that eats lives. The system demands the same document 3 times, each request separated by a weekend. By the 3rd ask, she said, your polite email reads like mockery. We wrote, eliminate duplicate doc requests, lock in 72-hour doc persistence, 1 ask policy for identical artifacts. A family advocate with a calm voice and furious eyes asked, will you publish where you still fail, or just where you look good? Priya answered before I could. We will publish the failures first, not to perform shame, but to aim help. She pointed at the slide. Listening without showing is theater. We're here to work. An older physician with reading glasses perched at the end of his nose said, I still write in margins because it's faster to explain to a human than to teach a drop-down. Those margins are where my care lives. Make sure your humans see them. We wrote, highlight margins, don't punish narrative. Build a parser that respects full sentences, not just codes. The Q&A went 90 minutes without a sag. Not because we were slick, but because the room didn't have patience for anything except verbs. We closed with details, the Sightline hotline number in 72-point font, the email that goes to humans, not a shared abyss, the schedule for the audits, the promise that every average in our reports will be accompanied by distribution plots a human can feel. Then we ended the official session, and the unofficial one began hallway clusters, eye contact that says, finally, and that strange, sacred quiet when something heavy has been put down in public. In the side room, with earnest sandwiches and cooling coffee, communications tried again. We can own the narrative. I looked at the whiteboard where someone had scrawled the 4 lines we started with. Let's own the changes, I said. Narratives will take care of themselves if the policies are true. We issued a short statement anyway, because silence invites fiction. It wasn't decoration. It was a map. What we missed, what changed today. How to reach a human, when we'll show our work. We didn't use Anna's or Emily's names. We didn't promise miracles. We promised contact, cadence, correction. The internet did what it does. Some praise, some sneer. Some better questions than we asked ourselves last quarter. The stock bobbed like a boat testing a new current and then steadied, because long-term investors like long-term math. None of that made a person's day shorter at a clinic. But the Sightline inbox did. That afternoon, inbox message #94 read, "Grandparent caregiver. Cannot answer noon calls. 2 prior attempts. Case auto-downgraded. Help." The old system would have chalked up another miss. The new one routed to a human with the authority to change the decision and the duty to close the loop. We called after 6 p.m. The grandmother cried once, briefly, the kind of cry that sounds like a hinge finally oiled. "Thank you for calling when I'm home," she said. It was not a miracle. It was sight with a clock attached. By Monday, the first audit draft sat on my desk. Early, imperfect, honest. For each change we had a column. Intended effect, observed effect, unintended consequences, next mitigation. The door weight index prototype was primitive and already useful counting steps. Re-explanations, toggles between departments, 2 minutes lost to weights that used to be invisible. We decided any index that stayed high for 3 weeks triggered mandatory redesign. We also added a rule Rachel insisted on. If a fix introduces a new heavy door somewhere else, the fix didn't count. Tuesday brought vendors again. The ones who had said, "Proceed with caveats," arrived with more caveats. Their lawyer pre-negotiated her eyebrows into permanent skepticism. I wrote 2 words in my notebook. Stay boring. We walked through the glide path, the shared cost, the SLA reweighting that aligned incentives with reality. When she asked, "How do we know you'll stick with this once the headlines are gone?" Mitchell answered with a line that tasted like steel. "Because the audit will be public and the penalties will be internal. We're changing comp to include door weight and outlier relief. If we fail, we pay." The eyebrows moved. Not much. Enough. Wednesday belonged to our own people, the teams 2 layers down, the ones who actually make the changes work or fail. We held a working session called Exceptions We Keep Seeing, which means they aren't exceptions. Sticky notes bloomed on walls. Patterns emerged faster than pride. Edge cases became a phrase we used only in air quotes. By noon, 3 workflows were in teardown: the duplicate doc gauntlet, the post-lunch callback trap, and the sandbox that archived messages when a case crossed midnight. That evening, I walked through the lobby to check the doors. A habit now, the new automatic mechanism had arrived. Facilities was mid-install, wires like vines, a ladder angling into the air. Leo saw me and grinned. "This one's going to feel like a handshake," he said. He stuck a piece of blue tape to the wall. Caution. New door learning to be kind. I stood there longer than I needed to, because sometimes you have to watch kindness get bolted into place. Thursday morning, I carried flowers to the clinic. Emily met me with a report crisp enough to pass any analyst's desk. Pain is medium. Sleep was medium minus. Soup was a win. Nurse changed it too, and the nice one said hi first. In the room, Anna was having the kind of day movies don't dramatize but real life marks as victory. Pain responsive, radiance stubborn. We talked through the town hall. She listened like a carpenter measuring, tapping, checking plumb. "Keep doing the boring parts," she said. "The world changes in the paperwork." I told her about Leo's door sign. She laughed, then winced, then laughed again. "A kind door," she said. "Put that in your product spec." Done. We didn't skip the grief. You can't pivot around it and call yourself whole. The nurse's voice softened, the room's weather shifted, and time did its silent arithmetic. Emily reached for my hand without asking, and I took it without words. We stood at the edge of the calendar and watched love do what love does, Be present when presence is all that's left to give. After, in the quiet hallway smell of disinfectant and courage, I called Rachel. "Rename the fund," I said. "Not after a person, after a practice." By the time I got back to the office, she had written it on a whiteboard big enough to be a promise. The Open Door Fund. Its purpose was not to launder guilt. It was to underwrite the gap between what our system can do today and what it owes tomorrow. Start with the clinics in the pilot. Expand per audit. Keep it boring. Keep it true. By the end of the week, small sentences started to replace large speeches. Override accepted, see human note. Family-centered escalation triggered delivered care Friday instead of Tuesday. Vendor, step 3, stall down 18% in pilot SLA reweight holding. Scheduler did not cry at work today. I taped that last one above my monitor. It looked like a joke to anyone who didn't know what work costs. To me, it was the first KPI that made me feel human. A month into the changes, the distributions began to narrow. Averages still looked good, but that wasn't the headline anymore. The story lived in the tails, fewer people falling off the edge of our bell curves. The door weight index fell in 3 of the 5 pilot flows. The 2 that rose taught us where kindness had to be designed twice. The Sightline team grew not in headcount at first, but in respect. People started using they, like a name you trust to show up. Priya trained 3 internal leads who carried her sentence like a mission patch. If the process can't see the person, the process is wrong. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain, I stood by the framed letter we'd mounted by the 27th floor elevators, not as decor, as direction. We'd added a small brass plaque beneath it. "Please see the rooms your choices reach." People stopped to read. Some touched the frame like it might be holy. It wasn't. It was homework we had to keep doing. Later that afternoon, a junior PM stopped me in the hall. "I used to think our niche was speed," she said. "Now I think our niche is speed that remembers who it's for." I smiled in a way that wasn't for a camera. "That's the product," I said. "Write it down." That night, I unlocked my phone and scrolled through messages I used to skim. A nurse sent a photo of a waiting room with fewer people leaning on their elbows. A scheduler sent a screenshot of a case routed to a human at 5:58 p.m. and approved at 6:07 p.m. with a note. "Feels different." A vendor rep sent a line I knew cost her pride. "The new SLA is fair. It's harder. It's better." I walked down to the lobby as the building exhaled the day. The new door sighed open like it had figured out the trick of being gentle. A father with a sleeping toddler breezed through without bracing. An older couple didn't have to coordinate their steps with physics. I didn't hold the door because the door was holding itself. I used to think the point of leadership was to build something impressive enough to be photographed. Now, I think the point is to bolt kindness into the hinge so thoroughly that nobody notices it anymore. Doors become backdrops when they're right. People become the picture. Upstairs, I found the whiteboard where I'd written it days ago. What is this for? Beneath it, in someone else's handwriting, maybe Rachel's, maybe Priya's, maybe Mai's, another line had appeared. For the person standing at the door. Care is expensive in all the ways we don't budget for. Money is the easy line item. Time, attention, humility. Those are the currencies that don't show up on a balance sheet until they're missing. A month into the changes, we learned what it costs to keep a promise once the applause moves on. It started with numbers because numbers always try to start the story. The first public audit landed on a Thursday morning, with the unromantic punctuality of a bank deposit. The top-line average still said we were winning. The distributions said something truer. The tails were shrinking. The people who used to get pushed to the edges were closer to the middle now. The door weight index fell in 3 critical flows and rose in 2, both of which had snuck their heaviness into steps we thought were frictionless. Mitchell stood at the screen with a pen he never capped. "We bought ourselves honesty," he said. "Now we have to pay for maintenance." He pointed to the two lines that stubbornly refused to fall. One was the callback loop, newly re-engineered but still punishing caregivers whose lives didn't bend around business hours. The other was inter-network transfers, where vendor borders behaved like moats. "This is where kindness goes to die if it's under-resourced," he said. We moved budget, we moved people, we moved our pride. The quarterly call with investors was our new ritual of candor. We didn't put a violin behind it. We didn't borrow a child's halo to protect our narrative. We presented numbers like a map you can actually use. Near-term margin dip accepted, churn stabilized, retention curves improving in exactly the segments we used to fail, network health trending up. Then, we put the audit on the screen distributions, not just means, and explained why averages lie if you let them. The analysts did their job. They asked their questions. "Are we sure you're not overcorrecting?" one voice asked. "Isn't this all just PR with extra steps?" another asked. I answered with what Priya had written at the top of her legal pad that first sightline morning. If the process can't see the person, the process is wrong. This isn't PR, it's plumbing. Bad plumbing floods the house, and then you pay more to pretend it's rain. Silence, then a chuckle from someone who'd also paid too much for a weather event that started in a pipe. We disclosed the comp changes we'd drafted and ratified. A slice of leadership bonuses now indexed to door weight in their domains and to outlier relief, not just to glossy top-line growth. You could feel the call shift. This was the part where the market decides if you mean it. Mitchell walked through the math calm as a surgeon. You get rewarded for making the door lighter where you live. You lose money if your teams slip back into average-only thinking. Nobody typed fast enough to hide their interest. After the call, Rachel stopped by my office with 3 sticky notes and a frown that didn't panic. "We need guardrails," she said. "Two kinds. Against paternalism and against performance." I knew what she meant. Paternalism is when we turn people into projects. Performance is when we turn care into theater. "Write them," I said. She did. Guardrail 1, no saviors. The sightline doesn't make heroes, it makes owners. If someone turns a human fix into a personal brand, we rotate them out. Guardrail 2, no staged kindness. No performative calls with cameras nearby. No surprise bills covered by the CEO. No quotas for tearful testimonials. Our output is policy, not content. Guardrail 3. Mercy doesn't evaporate. Any override policy that relies on a single person's mood gets rewritten. Kindness must be auditable. She taped the list to the wall and, without ceremony, to the inside of my notebook. We learned quickly that care is not only about making good choices, it's about resisting lazy ones. A mid-level manager proposed a fast-track lane for high-priority patients code for people with influence. The old reflex almost said yes. The new reflex laughed without humor. "The fast track already exists," Priya said. "It's called being seen. Build that." The Open Door Fund started with pilot clinics and soon made its way to places our software didn't even touch. Yet bridge grants to keep patients from falling into gaps our forms couldn't patch. Transportation stipends, where we learned a bus schedule, is sometimes a crueler gate than a policy. After-hours call coverage paid for by us when we discovered that business hours is a phrase invented by people who don't take 3 buses home. We built a practice I didn't know how to name at first, shadow KPIs. For every metric that made our dashboards glow, we paired a question that could ruin the party if ignored. Average time to approval, who's still waiting, and why, and what would it cost to move them today? Vendor SLA compliance. What does this incentive make decent people do badly? Model confidence score. Where does confidence become arrogance? The first shadow KPI to bite us was a small one. The free text trigger had flooded the sightline on Mondays. We were proud of the catch. We were drowning. An engineer named Hana traced the spike to a weekend batch job that scrubbed notes too aggressively if certain header fields were blank. Monday mornings were triage for problems born on Saturday nights. We moved the job to a human check window and added a warning if the fields weren't actually empty but mistyped. The line on the chart fell like a fever breaking. Not all lessons arrived in dashboards. Some walked in on 2 feet. A father came to a clinic with a paper bag full of medicine bottles and an envelope that was all the wrong kind of thin. The case had been auto-denied twice, each time with a note that read like it had been written by a polite machine. The Sightline took the case. A reviewer named Kareem noticed that the address had changed midstream shelter to temporary housing, and our system had treated the move like a fraud flag. He put his name on the line, called at 6, approved at 6:08, called back at 6:11 to explain the rest. The father cried once, quietly, like a hinge getting attention. I wrote Kareem a note. Not to put him on a pedestal, but to put his verbs in the archive. You saw a person, I wrote, and you made sure the system did too. We formalized that archive. We called it the Red Team of Stories because data needs companions that argue with it. Once a month, we sit in a room, read 5 cases out loud, and ask the shadow KPI questions until the truth splits open. We bring the engineers, the operators, the custodians, the schedulers, the nurses. Leo brings tape. Priya brings tea. We bring our faces. On a gray Tuesday, the Red Team taught us a phrase that keeps saving us: latency of compassion. It's not just whether the right thing happens, it's how long it takes before a person feels the care. A fix that arrives on day 5 is not the same as a fix that arrives on day 1, even if the chart shows both as resolved. We added a new line to the audit: time to relief. The number embarrassed me. Good. The next month it did so a little less. Grief didn't disappear just because we improved a hinge. There were days when the Sightline carried news we couldn't fix, rooms where policy was equal parts ballast and comfort. The day Anna died, the building felt like it had lost a floor. Emily's text arrived with 5 words that held the whole sky. She said the door's still open. I went to the clinic and stood in the corridor outside the room and let that sentence build a shelter over the people inside it. We didn't announce donations. We didn't name funds after her. We watered the plants on the windowsill and made sure the nurse at 2 still said hi first and paid the invoice that shouldn't have existed in the first place. We kept the vow. Keep sight, keep the door open. Weeks later, I met Emily and her aunt at a park where kites insisted on flying even when the wind forgot its responsibilities. We sat on a bench that needed paint. Emily pointed at the sky like she'd negotiated the treaty herself. The Open Door Fund is for other people now, she said, testing the sentence. Is that okay? I swallowed. That's perfect, I said. That's what it's for. We didn't talk about legacy. We talked about math homework. We talked about her shoe that kept untying. We talked about the window in the door. Back at the office, Rachel brought me a memo with a title that made me smile. Boring Permanence. It was a list of rituals that would outlive anyone's zeal. Quarterly audits, published with distributions and time to relief. Red Team of Stories convened monthly with cross-functional attendance mandatory. Door weight index on every product review. Any spike triggers design, freeze, and remedial plan. Compensation slices tied to door weight and outlier relief, reviewed annually. Shadow KPI pairing for every metric, no single number success allowed. Vendor SLAs reweighted, with shared cost clauses and compassion latency penalties where applicable. Family-centered escalation default on for clinics serving majority caregivers with constrained hours. No saviors divided by no staged kindness divided by mercy auditable, guardrails enforced. Ship it, I said, and she did, not to the PR team, but to the people who actually move the levers. The culture learned new reflexes. A junior engineer taped a hand-drawn flowchart by a monitor. When in doubt, ask a nurse. A product manager replaced edge case with neighbor in her meeting notes and watched her brain argue itself into tenderness. A vendor rep emailed, "Your new SLA makes my job harder and my sleep better." A scheduler sent 3 words to the Sightline inbox at 6:13 p.m. on a Friday. She got through. We made mistakes. We caught ourselves wanting to tell a better story than we'd lived. We almost built a dashboard widget that would have gamified compassion, then laughed it out of the room. We learned to treat later as a red flag and, on average, as a smoke alarm. We learned to put names on decisions and to own the consequences like grown-ups. We learned that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is write an email that says, "We failed here. Here's how we'll show it. Here's when we'll fix it." And then fix it. On an earnings day that felt less like theater and more like stewardship, we added 1 new slide to the deck, a simple table titled "What Care Costs and Why It's Worth It." The rows weren't dramatic. Extra Sightline headcount, vendor cost sharing, after-hours coverage, transportation stipends, training time. The last row was my favorite. Time spent listening. The rightmost column was the return. Retention, resilience, regulatory posture, recruiting fidelity, moral sleep. You could see some eyes on the Zoom go soft the way eyes do when a spreadsheet unexpectedly reminds you of someone you love. I ended that call with the only line I trusted enough to place at the end. "We used to measure success in how fast our yes traveled," I said. "Now we measure it in how light the door feels to the person standing at it. That is our niche." When the meeting ended, I walked to the lobby like a man checking his own pulse. The new automatic door had a sound I could have recognized in a crowd, the sigh of metal that wants to be helpful. A young mother pushed a stroller through without bracing. A man on crutches didn't have to nod at a stranger. A courier backed a cart in and never broke stride. Leo spotted me and pointed at a tiny sticker he'd placed on the frame. DW 1.1. Door wait. Updated weekly like a heartbeat. Upstairs, the framed letter waited. I still read it, not out of guilt anymore, but gratitude. It had stopped being a mirror that accused me and started being a window that kept me honest. Please see her. Please see the rooms your choices reach. On my desk, a small pile of notes waited Kareem's follow-ups, Priya's tea-stained agenda, Rachel's boring permanence addendum, Mitchell's curve updates, a quick scribble from Mai. No bathroom cry this week. I taped that last one next to the first one. Between them was the work, not a miracle, not a campaign, a practice. That evening, before the building exhaled, I took a marker to the whiteboard where "What is this for?" still held the wall. Under it, in letters I tried to make as legible as possible, I wrote, "For the people who don't have time for our learning curve." Then I underlined it twice. Then I went downstairs, checked the flowers, rotated the tired ones out, and left the door open. What months do they turn change into habit or expose it as theater? By the time the leaves on the street outside our building traded chlorophyll for memory, the Sightline no longer needed an introduction slide. People said the name the way you say elevator or stairwell, something the building simply has. The second audit published like a season arriving predictable and still new. Averages kept behaving. That was never the point. The tails kept narrowing. That was, door weight fell across 4 major flows and held steady in one stubborn process we hadn't torn down yet because bureaucracy pretends to be load-bearing. Time to relief, our truest confession came down to a number that didn't embarrass us, then kept inching. I watched those inches like some people watch stock tickers, not because inches are dramatic, but because love lives in them. The Open Door Fund found its own routine, too. Quiet disbursements with polite emails and real follow-through. Transportation stipends that turned no-show into on my way. A midnight call rota that made after hours mean when you actually need us. Once in a while, a clinic sent a photo, a hand-drawn thank you, taped to a nursing station, a couch in a waiting room that doesn't swallow spines, a door handle installed lower because small hands deserve leverage. Some days, we got it wrong. The red team of stories did not become a ritual to flatter ourselves. It stayed an argument with our instincts. One month, an engineer read a case where we fixed the callback loop by adding one more screen that asked for consent to call after 6 p.m. We moved the wait, she said. We didn't remove it. We took the screen out, added a real scheduling option, and gave schedulers the right to name a time and keep it. The next audit called us honest. It did not call us perfect. We learned that kindness has versions. Version 1. A person intervenes. Version 2. The process expects the person. Version 3. The process becomes the person would have done no permission slip required. We kept shipping versions. Vendors kept being vendors, part partner, part opponent, part mirror. The re-weighted SLAs taught us who wanted to be good and who wanted us to say they were. Some left. Most stayed. New ones arrived carrying sentences that sounded like they'd been practicing decency in private. We've reworked our Step 2 intake to stop penalizing narrative. One wrote, "Your door wait spec helped. I printed it and taped it to the side of my monitor where good sentences go to keep me from writing lazy ones." Inside the company, the culture stopped needing pep talks to remember its face. People did things without asking for permission, because permission had been delegated to purpose. A designer mocked up a kindness budget widget, a visible counter in internal tools that reminded teams how much capacity we were reserving for the weird, the hard, the precisely human. A data scientist shipped a shadow KPI toggle that turned dashboards into questions with one click. A junior PM made a laminated card we now clip to our badges, a 4-line catechism that saved more arguments than any policy could. What is this for? Who is at the door? How light is the door? Who owns it if it's not? Visitors noticed the plaque by the elevator and asked in the way visitors ask if something is for show. We didn't sell the story. We pointed to the hotline number, the audit link, the sign-in sheet for the next red team, the DW sticker on the front door frame that Leo updates on Fridays like a scoreboard for gravity. On a rain-polished afternoon, I walked into a partner clinic and found Leo on a ladder, leveling a small brass plate above a doorway. He'd gotten facilities to mill it from leftovers. The plate read, "This door is light on purpose." He gave me the tiny screws, the last 2 turns, the little ritual of finish. "People should know," he said, "when heaviness isn't an accident." We stood back and watched 3 people pass underneath without needing to notice. That's the right kind of invisibility. There were personal endings to steward, too. Grief doesn't use our calendars, it uses its own. Emily came by our lobby often now. Not like a visitor, more like a person who knows where the chairs are. Sometimes she sat on the steps by the green wall. Sometimes at Rachel's desk chattering about a science project that involved seeds and wishful thinking. Once, on a Saturday morning when the office was a museum of empty desks, she asked to see the 27th floor. We walked to the frame together. She read the letter like it was the first time and the 100th. She had good handwriting, Emily said, and I had to swallow before I could answer. She did, I said. And she wrote good sentences. Emily nodded as if sentences could hold you by the hand. We didn't make a scholarship in Anna's name. Her sister did, quietly, at the clinic where her life had so many of its braver days. Late-night childcare vouchers for caregivers who don't have someone to leave the kids with at appointment time. The open door fund matched and then got out of the way, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is give money and not take credit. Not every scene was soft. Some were the kind where professionalism gets sharp to keep the edges clean. I sat in a room with a mid-level leader who had gamed the door weight metric by pushing heavy steps down a hallway the dashboard didn't count. "Why?" I asked. He said the sentence I once might have respected for its candor. "Because the score matters." I said the sentence I didn't know how to say 2 years ago. The person matters. He left the company a month later. We didn't write a morality play about it. We wrote a job posting that said, "You'll be measured by how light the door feels." There were ceremonies I didn't expect to be invited to. At a clinic in a neighborhood that gets more police than parks, a group of nurses organized a pinning circle for the launch of a new after-hours schedule we underwrote. They gave Leo a small enamel door pin, the kind you'd miss from 3 feet. He wore it on his work vest and pretended not to notice when people noticed. "It's not for me," he said when I teased him. "It's for the doors." He said 9. He said, "Head now." The red team changed me in quieter ways. It taught me to sit in a chair and listen to a story without making it about what I will do next. The room learned to tolerate silence until the sentence we were avoiding arrived. We made a practice of reading emails out loud, the ones we might have filed under noise, and asking what architecture forced a human to write this in the first place. Often the answer was, ours. Often the fix was, our hands. Mitchell's spreadsheets learned humility too. He started adding a small italic line under the glossy numbers. Here's what this hides. Sometimes it was a neighborhood, sometimes a workflow. Sometimes a class of people we didn't name on purpose because naming is how you hold things and not how you reduce them. He learned to love curves that look boring because boredom in the right shape means the crisis is elsewhere. Rachel's guardrails became muscle memory. Communications tried to spin a story once eager to prove we were leaders in compassionate AI. She shut it down with 3 sentences and a look. Compassion isn't a brand, it's a budget. Show the budget or don't use the word. We showed the budget, we stopped calling it compassion. We called it cost of being a decent neighbor. Hing as Ride-Avention. Priya kept training new Sightline leads until the room no longer needed her in it to remember the sentence at the top of her pad. She never took a job with us, I asked once. She smiled the way people smile when they belong to a bigger thing. "I work for the rooms," she said. "You can keep paying my invoice." We did, happily and on time. At home, my mother put the enamel door pin on the little cloth board where she keeps the predictable things lost and found buttons, a safety pin that saved a church dress once, a medal from a 5 Kelvins neither of us trained for. She still asks the same question every time I bring her an update. Are you doing this to be good or to feel good? I recovered a better answer. To be true, I say, and I'm learning to let good be the shadow that truth casts. We began to teach what we learned, not with TED-friendly gloss, but with workshops that started with a hard question. What would it take for you to publish the distribution? We told smaller companies how to counterfeit less and listen more. We reminded big ones that averages are where your press releases live and tails are where your soul does. Some nodded and wrote it down. Some nodded and did nothing. A few called 6 months later with questions that sounded like they had been living inside the questions for a while. How did you convince your board? They asked. We didn't, I said. We told the truth until it sounded like a plan. On a winter morning that borrowed light from somewhere gentler, I rode the elevator with a man who held a paper bag of pill bottles and a look I recognized the expression of someone performing competence because the day will punish you if you don't. We rode in silence to 27. When the doors opened, he saw the frame, read the plaque, and did something I hadn't seen before. He took out his phone, took a picture, and then put the phone away without sharing it with anyone. He just needed to remember the sentence later. I thought, that's the right kind of virality. There were days when I wanted to be done, to have a finish line we could run through on a Friday with a slide that said, Mission accomplished in tasteful sans serif. The red team kept me honest about how silly that desire is. Systems don't finish, they drift toward entropy. The work isn't to cross a line. It's to keep walking in the right direction with your eyes open and your hand on the hinge. We codified a final ritual, not for sentiment, for stamina. Once a quarter, we gather the sight line. Facilities, product, compliance, vendor ops, and a rotating set of people who have opinions because they've turned keys more than they've turned phrases. We meet in the lobby, not a conference room. Leo brings a step stool. Someone reads the latest audit aloud while people pass through the doors we're responsible for. Then we do 3 things. 1. We rotate the tired flowers out and replace them with something that looks like it intends to survive. 2. We peel off the old DW sticker and put the new one on while someone explains why it's up or down and what we'll do next either way. 3. We read 1 paragraph from a story in the Red Team archive and say the person's first name out loud if they gave us permission. Sometimes the paragraph is a failure. Sometimes a fix. Always a reminder that the building isn't neutral. On the first of those mornings, Emily stood with us holding the new DW sticker like it was a trophy with glue. She had a notebook where she'd written questions in funny loops. "Does the door know when it's being kind?" she asked. Priya laughed softly. "No," she said, "but the people do." Emily nodded, satisfied with reality. She pressed the sticker onto the frame with both hands, then wiped a smudge with the sleeve of a jacket her aunt had hemmed. "There," she said. "Now it knows because we know." After the little ceremony, Rachel and I walked her outside. The city was a friendlier machine that day, buses on time, crosswalks obeyed like agreements, strangers not performing niceness so much as refusing cruelty. At the curb, Emily looked up at me with the kind of seriousness children have when they're about to make a rule. "Promise you'll keep the window in the door?" she said. "So kids can see who's coming?" "I promise," I said, and I meant it more than any revenue target I've ever hit. The day the new automatic door side opened for the first time without a technician nearby, Leo stuck an extra piece of blue tape on the frame, just a short line, easy to miss. "Open by default." He winked like a magician who doesn't use traps. "Fails, closed is for a vault," he said. "We're not a vault." That afternoon, I sat in my office and opened a blank document. The way you open a window. I started writing guidelines. I wish someone had handed me 10 years ago. Not laws, not commandments, habits for people who build systems other people must live inside. Don't design to the average. Design to the edge and let the average be grateful. Publish the distribution like you'd publish your values. If you won't, question both. Put a human in the loop where confidence is not understanding. Then train the loop to behave like the human would have. Index comp to the weight of the door, not just the speed of the line. Treat later as a red flag word. If you can write later, you can write now with a cost. Pay it or say why you won't. Archive verbs, not heroes. Let the people who open the building name the heaviness you missed. Then make their names part of the design document. Remember your face. My mother's line. It belongs everywhere. I didn't publish the page. I taped it inside the supply closet door, across from the old napkin Mitchell and I had signed. It felt right there where the toner lives, and the paper refills, and the pens go to disappear. Wisdom belongs with the supplies. On the anniversary of the letter, we did not hold a gala. We brewed 2 strong coffee in the lobby and handed out plain paper with 1 question printed at the top. What door is heavy today? People wrote answers I wouldn't have thought to ask for bathroom code pads that time out too fast for arthritic hands, visitor kiosks that assume everyone can read English quickly, a conference room booking app that punishes the unfancy. Facilities scratched down parts numbers. Product managers took pictures. I read each sheet like it was addressed to me. It was. As the day stretched into usable light, I walked with Leo around the block, a ritual we'd invented to check the outside hinges of our lives. He told me about his wife's hands and the new automatic door at her clinic, and how she laughs now when it opens, as if a building remembered her. "It's silly," he said, "but it helps." I told him silly help is still help. We rounded the corner in time to watch a courier push through our front entrance without bracing. He didn't look grateful. Good. He looked like a person with a job. Not a test. Back at the frame, I touch the brass plate the way some people touch mezuzahs, not out of superstition, out of gratitude for the sentence it holds us to. Please, see the rooms your choices reach. I do. Not perfectly. Not permanently. Daily? There's a line I used to say at conferences when the mic and the lighting made me brave in the wrong way. We built a city of efficiency. Now, if someone hands me a microphone and insists, I say something quieter that costs more. We're learning to be a good neighbor. It doesn't trend. It endures. In the end, as much as any of this has an end, the changes didn't make us saints. They made us specific. Systems either move weight onto the people with the least grip strength, or they move weight off. That's the binary I can live with. The rest is metrics that behave if you treat them like nouns that serve verbs. I still carry a copy of the letter in my inside pocket. Not the original. That belongs to the frame and to the rooms that needed it first. My copy is soft at the fold, the ink steady. On days when my calendar tries to bully my character, I unfold it, read the sentence that started the rearrangement, and do the next boring right thing. Please see her. Please see the rooms your choices reach. We do. We will. We keep the window and the door. We rotate the tired flowers out. We oil the hinge. We publish the distribution. We answer after 6. We put names on ownership and budgets behind mercy. We ask Leo where heaviness hides. We ask Mai if she cried at work. We tape a new DW sticker to the frame and tell the truth about why it changed. We remember our faces. And when the wind picks up and the door pays attention, it opens the way it should. Light on purpose, open by default, for whoever is standing there with a life to live and no time for our learning curve.